Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to CLACS's third talk in our series of lectures for the semester. My name is Patsy Lewis, and I'm the interim director of CLACS. And it's my distinct pleasure to invite Professor Iria Puyosa both to CLACS and to introduce her at this event. Iria Puyosa is the Craig M. Cogut Visiting Professor in Latin American Studies at CLACS. Her research focuses on political communication and civil society participation in public affairs. Her current work focuses on networked social movements, information disorders, and civil resistance under authoritarian regimes, and internet public policy. Professor Puyosa holds a PhD in Higher Education Public Policy from the University of Michigan. She has taught postgraduate courses in ICTs and political processes, public opinion and social media, media and politics, research methods in digital environments, political communication, radical communication, and social network analysis in universities in Venezuela, Ecuador, and Colombia. Professor Puyosa is also the chair for the section on Venezuelan studies of the Latin American Studies Association, LASA. She is currently teaching an undergraduate course for us in our Latin American and Caribbean concentration on networked social movements. The title of her talk today is Eroding Democracy on Twitter, a network analysis of online propaganda by the Venezuelan government and its foreign allies. Welcome to Professor Puyosa. We have translators, and I want to just recognize and thank our translator, Shirley Moore. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Patsy.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Professor Faxing, por introducing me. Voy a hablar en español. Ustedes, los que no entienden
The ones that
español,
don't understand Spanish, you have
la traducción que nos va a
the
estar
translation that's
acompañando.
coming along
Voy a tratar
with
en lo
Shirley. I will
posible
do
de
my
hablar
best
lento,
to speak
algo que a mí me
slowly,
cuesta
something that is
muchísimo.
very challenging for me.
El tema que
The,
vamos a
the topic
trabajar
that we're going to
hoy
work on today is about the eroding democracy on Twitter. It's a topic that I've been studying for the last few years, almost 5 years, and in particular, this project I started in 2018. During the presentation, I will show you some of the analysis, some of the results of two moments of this project, two studies, one in May or June of 2018, and the other in January of 2019 this year. And I'll make some indications of what I'm working on at the moment so that you can all have a vision, general vision of the project and over the use of box trolls and different types of automated propaganda in regards to the politics in Venezuela. During the project, I've analyzed other political actors, but in this presentation, I'm going to be focusing foundationally on the actors addressing the government. And we'll try to see how it has been structured, the action of Chavism within the space of Twitter, which is really particularly important with the confrontational political issues in Venezuela, which is what I will be showing during the presentation. The study that is that I'll be presenting in this presentation is based on the use of an analysis of social networks. And it captures the relationships in the communities and the different actors that are participating in the confrontation. I will not be laboring on the context of the Venezuelan political context, which is very complex and it would take way longer than the hour that we have, but I will show you the results of this study in particular. The reason why in one way this is relevant for an audience more or less more interested in social media is because we have observed a tendency in eroding democracy in the 21st century in regards to the third wave of authoritarian, and a lot of countries are evolving. As initially, countries with democratic systems are becoming more and more authoritative. We're noticing that in other countries, and one of the relevant factors that is present in this aspect of democracy is the constant propaganda that is being established by the government online, and the different strategies that are used to disseminate information and fight dirty through the channels of government. And it's really eroding democracy that we're seeing in different parts of the country, especially in Latin America. Venezuela is probably the best example, possibly because it's the longest. It's a process that started 20 years ago in 1999, while other parts of the region are processes that are a little bit more recent, like in Ecuador, and processes that are now alerting, becoming more that are newer, like in Mexico or in Brazil, where we're seeing signs that there could be a process of eroding the democracy. It's happened in Europe. It's happening in the United States. There are some concerning signs, but these cases are not reaching this level. One thing that I want to observe is that we are seeing this in governments in countries with governments to the left or to the right. That's not the point. The point is more the dismantling of the democracy to control the power long term. And we've seen that in Venezuela. These images are from the study Disparities of Democracy. And you can see in the curves where you could see the restrictions to the liberty of expression and the control over the civil society are correlated directly with the eroding of the democracy. And then that's why this vision of putting it in this context, in this macro context, in regards to Venezuela in particular, everything that has to do with that type of information online, with the disinformation and the populating of social media started in 2010, where there was this official launch which was recognized as the scandal. That was the official account of Hugo Chavez. And aside from that account, he had a mission. Chavez Candanga had a mission which was dependent on the vice presidency of the republic and the monetary communication of social media to harass activism, social activists and political activists that were on the platform at that time. And after that, began to dedicate itself to produce tendencies on trending topics that were favorable to the position of the government. And so in Venezuela, we have had 9 years or 10 years with this type of phenomenon, with experience that are evident in the rest of the world as of 2016 in regards to the presidential elections here in the United States, and then recently in Brazil, where WhatsApp was used, there was much more emphasis on WhatsApp. But we've seen this in other Latin American countries. In 2012, it was the España box in Mexico. We saw it in Ecuador in the 2013 elections. And in Argentina, it's happened in all of the continent, in Africa as well. It's happening with Nigeria. It's one of the cases where box trolls that were sponsored by the political parties affected the elections, but that wasn't really visible to the rest of the world. It was more of a local problem. But in the last 3 years, it's become an issue that has gotten global attention. So in regards to that, we have a little bit more experience because we've been living it for several different years. And so that whole space in regards to political information online has some antecedents in regards to the homogeneity that has been planted as a political state in regards to Venezuelan government and Chavez status as presidency in as of 2012, which was to eliminate or control the private networks because they protected processes that were contrary to the revolutionary process, and that all types of fluid information should be controlled. So this idea becomes really a practical approach in 2017 when Radio Caracas television closed, and then 39 different radio stations closed, and then the restrictions started to the use of the internet. In 2010, like I said, this started the mission. Chavez Candanga was the homogeny of the communication, and that was translated to the atmosphere online. And these antecedents are important to understand because just like Chavez predicted in those workshops in 2017, the massive red networks, the TV, the radio in Venezuela are not massive anymore. Massive said they were going to become alternative mediums or marginalized mediums, and effectively that happened. Since 2014, there are very little important or big private networks. Everything's under the control of the government or businesses that are part of the Chavism movement and the group that is in control. So there's very little spaces that are not aligned politically with the government. And for that reason, in Venezuela, there's an early immigration of social media to express political issues and concerns. And in the last few years, we've seen some studies that have arisen as a result of this topic. And 15% of Venezuelans use massive networks. In regards to political events, they don't really look for the TV. They don't look for the newspapers. They look for the internet. They look for Twitter. They ask their friends on WhatsApp. And that generates a series of problems, which I'm not going to go into too abundantly, that have to do with the population and really the lack of information that goes out in regards to the campaigns. But what I would like to really focus on with this presentation is that 50% of the population is saying that their greatest sense of information is Twitter, and that gives you a context for how important it is to really dismantle these social networks and campaigns of communication. The study that I've done has captured data from Twitter, directly from Twitter. I used the application, the software from Twitter to capture the data, and I use Node XL, which allows you to really introduce yourself on social networks. And in this data that I worked, there are tendencies that were trending topics in regards to political during May 8, 2018 and 2019, February 2019, and captured through Node XL and on Twitter to analyze the relationships that happen through the users that are generating these topics, to see how it is that this propaganda is coordinated. How is it organized, the generation of a trending topic, and then how that affects the political discussion. The techniques that are used for this analysis are basically the identification of communities, and I use algorithms of modularity and clustering, which are similar, and they tend to be grouped together based on colors, which shows that there are many commonalities between these users. The community follows themselves, they follow each other. So there's a cluster of relationships, but also through themes, the words that they use even the tags, the hashtags that they use, but also the words. What is the focus? What is the theme of their discussion? That also creates clusters. And then another thing that generates clusters is what is being shared, where are their links taking you, what other websites, what other content is being used in sharing all this in propaganda. And then once I have these clusters, another thing that I analyze is what are the nodes that are influential, what is the most ingenuous way to share information, is basically how many users or followers someone has. But when you initiate in the social networks, you realize popularity is not influential, but influence is really determined by the capacity to access information and put themes or topics on the agenda. So for that, there was 4 different measurements that I used: the closeness, the centrality measures, and then the closeness, which really generate the peak. And the betweenness allows you to connect 2 communities, which are the borders between 2 different groups. And between them, there are connectors. There's betweenness. There's groups or people that are different. And that's important to pass from one group, a political group, to another political group. So when we're doing propaganda, that's something that we want to do. And then agent vector has to do with the value of your network. How many influential people are in your network? Not you, but those that you're connected with, those that follow you. While your page rank, it really has to do with your own influential, not your network, but your influence. All of these elements allow me to implicate who are the actors that are moving a trending topic ahead. With this analysis, I was able to work with that data since May 2018 to remind you that in May 2018, the presidential elections that were in question and declared illicit because they didn't comply with a competitive political process, and they were illegal. And so they did not have Maduro did not have an actual competent contender. And that was the election that he won with an organism that has yet to be recognized, and other countries have not recognized either. During that campaign, the government, with the Ministry of Information within the country, every night at 11 p.m. said what was the tag for the day. They decided what they would be talking about the following day, and they would share it through Telegram, where all the militant and functions of the ministry were able to communicate. And based on that, it would be reproduced for all of the organisms of the state. All of the Venezuelan organisms participated in the political election of Maduro. The Venezuelan government prohibits the participation of its own government in political affairs. But one thing that I want to highlight in regards to this Ministry of Communication, this green group that you see here are the affiliates that are part of the network of Patria, which is the tag that they use, or the card that they use to help the Venezuelan people buy food. So what we see in this green group are people that are affiliate with the card of the Patria, which show their addition to the government to, let's say, show their positive presence to the government. What we also see is the blue group over here, which are the armed forces, all of the military organisms. This whole blue sector are the zones of defense, home defense, the commanders of the military, the ministry, all of the military ranks are all the blue groups. And these purple groups up top are Triterio Venezuela, is an organization of Twitter users, common not really attached to any institution or registered institution, but they're, affiliates of Chavism. And within that group of Criterio Venezuela, they do a registry through the networks to participate in, for people to participate in raffles. So if you use the tag, you can win a prize from raffles, which are like $2 or $3 prizes or something like that. If you use the tag, and in this context, $2 to $3 isn't really a lot of money, but for a Venezuelan, it really is a lot of money. But it's important for that. In Venezuela, we have been able to see that there's a lot of boxes being affiliated. It's not just people there. There's people that are activists towards Chavism, but also some boxes generating there as well. That topic about the boxes in the Venezuelan case generates a case that I call a distraction, an automated distraction, which, for lack of a better term, because what we were noticing was that there were trending topics that seemed to be relevant, absurd, irrelevant, absurd, or just different. It was always something absurd that was always a trending topic. And in this case, you can dictate that a lot of these trending topics were being generated through a box, and also through companies that were dedicated to do retweets. They were charging, companies that were charging like 25 cents, but they were generating all these retweets. So it was a massive movement. And one of the companies that I came across during these assessments is registered in Florida. And the tweets that it does were coming from Mexico. So these are operations that are distributed, are decentralized, and are operating as distractors. They generate topics that cause a lot of attention because they don't go into the logic of what's important in the political conversation, and they accomplish a great distraction. They do trending topics that are contrary. One had to do with the Venezuelan rooms, postilla, which is really scary for Venezuelan. It's the very seal that we need to get outside of the country. And so one of the trending topics was jokes about the postilla, which is a problem that is real. People talk about that. It's difficult. It's hard to get your birth certificate. It's hard to get your study certificates because you don't have that portilla. So, but in this case, it were all jokes. It was all jokes about the postilla. It was like a week before the elections. There's examples like that could be important, but they're trivialized by this dysfunction, this automated dysfunction. And then the third strategy, the first two strategies were things that I was expecting. Just with observation that I had done during all these years, I was expecting to find those things, how the dysfunction of hashtags was disseminated and how things were decentralized. But I didn't know which ones were the actors, but I kind of had an idea. But this part was very surprising for me back in 2018, which was I found that there were some users at that time that I called cyborgs that were infiltrating the oppositional networks. They were users that had behavior semi-automatic. Some things lead you to think that they're bots, but they're actually engaging. They're having conversation. They're high productivity. They emit way more Twitter posts than any average person with jobs and family and stuff like that can produce. But they're very high they're very high in communicating. They have a high level of understanding the psychology, the political psychology. They're very focused. Us humans, we're very complex. We're contradictory. There are people that are pacifists, but then they like boxing. Those things are normal. That happens, but not these. They're super organized, very focused on one thing, never talking about any other topic, but only this one. And that's part of, it's almost like they're walking, they're following a guide, and they're always talking about the same thing. Many of them are very, very popular with many, many users. One of the characteristics is that a very extremist topic, it's violent discussions. One of the things that I observed is that every time the oppositional parties, maybe the ones that you see here, the Justicia that you see here, the orange that are the Voluntad Popular, and then the ones that are more expressed towards the front. Whenever they had some time of activity or a concentration or a meeting, these extremists, cyber extremists, would use those hashtags to instigate violent acts. They would attack the oppositional leaders, saying that they weren't being real oppositional, not really the way that I'm saying, more with insults and offense, calling them traitors. And so that type of behavior. And another thing that I observed was that they were very focused to connected with international networks, activists in other parts of the world and country. In that month, on May, there were a lot. May and June, there was a lot of political movements and elections in Colombia. I don't have the connection and evidence that there were an actual connection, but they would tag activists in the center of Colombia, trying to put between the two countries that Colombia could become Venezuela, and that the Venezuelan situation was going to be influential to Colombia. And then that was an evidence that generated some fear, because the Venezuelan issue was being used as propaganda to show both sides that it could be an influential. And these cyborg extremists were introducing those tags. They were introducing it in Colombia, or the Venezuelan topic in Colombia, or the Colombian topic in Venezuela. And in regards to the general analysis, what I noticed was that these trolls would connect structurally more with Chavism in regards to the fountains that they would use, where they would go in regards to their links, what were the videos, what were their web pages that they were using. They all coincided more with the ones that were used by Chavismo in regards to the government movements, or even the just average persons that were supporting Chavism or automated accounts. What I was noticing was that they were looking more in regards to their fountains to the Chavism, in which was what they were supposed to be attacking. So their tags in regards to fraud was a lot. They were very high with that, with going to the street, going against protesting, and just a lot of things that were being used they all had the same pattern. And these three strategies made me think that there was a division in regards to the work. It was like some trolls were scheduled to create propaganda for the government. Some were scheduled to interfere with the opposition, and others were to create noise or distract. That was the hypothesis that I had in that moment in June or July of 2018, when I was analyzing this data. In September of 2018, I received a document that is this that you see right here that shows the army of trolls. It was a document that some journalists sent to me that had been infiltrated from the Ministry of Justice and Peace, which was used to train the activists of the asymmetric war, the war on Twitter. The internal Ministry of Peace and Justice, using CLACS, which was the committee that distributes food in the neighborhoods. When I'm saying they distribute food, but you buy it from them like a supermarket. Don't assume that it's free. But the CLACS had a relationship with the activists, the base activists, and they give them workshops on communication. And one of the workshops was on the use of Twitter. And within that manual to do those workshops on Twitter, there was this establishment that there were going to be 5 different groups, and that these 5 groups would have the pro-government group, which I had detected. I had detected it in my studies, and then the one that was going to distract, and I had detected that one in my studies, and then the one with the distraction that would launch out activists and trolls that would pick up conversations or initiate conversations that would take the opposition or to the base of the opposition to 2 things. One, criticize the leadership that was supposed to be ineffective, or to initiate acts of violence. That is the function that this opposition trolls have. And in the manual, there are what they are calling fake news, which is a term that I typically don't use. I avoid using that, which are the ones that are dedicated to unfound any information that is being shared, or general information, whether it's political or not. It's just they're creating false information. They're contaminating the space. What I would like to signal out in regards to the distractors accounts and the false positive accounts is that they contaminate, they dirty, they fill with misinformation and emotional tension. The only space, or the primary space, that Venezuelans are using to obtain political information. So then the space becomes unvaluable to the people. So they start to substitute this network. They don't have a space to go to when they're trying to find another substitute for the massive networks of media information. So that is the process behind all of this information being dismantled. And I've looked at accounts from Mexico and one other country where there's some of the same tendencies. So it's one of the things that I want to highlight is that it's not just a propaganda to go for, but it's also in regards to creating propaganda to impede the different groups from directly taking their messages to the population, where there could be a direct conversation in regards to the political aspect. So it's just a disfragmenting of the communication. It's not about being in favor or going against, but it's for it to be hard for people to see what is happening and be able to make decisions over political decisions. In January of 2019, I decided that I wanted to check if things would start to replicate, if the same tendencies would replicate. But I had one new question. I wanted to know what were the new variables that were relational in the new political debate? And effectively, in cases that started in January 2019, I've seen the same patterns. The 3 strategies that I've pointed out, the strategy trending topics in relations to governments, and the distractions, and the strategy to really distract from the opposition. But one that we're noticing is the presence of armed forces in the use of government propaganda. And the hashtag there is never traitors, which is a trending topic. There's a lot of hashtags that become trending topics with those types of errors, which have to do with how things become viral with the first person and then everyone copies it and it just goes out. This error becomes a trending topic. Then they correct it. But the one that went out, the one that went viral, is the one with the error. But here, what really sticks out to me is that one of the tags is that the protagonist is the armed forces. It is a hashtag that is created by the armed forces to show that the military supports the government. But the most important thing that I wanted to focus on in this case was the presence of autocratic regimes in overseas. And this Venezuelan debate became viral and widespread. It was a trending global topic, which was "We Are Maduro," which is a hashtag that where the majority of the tweets were in English, but that's a little contradictory. That it wasn't the Venezuelans that were saying that they were Maduro. But the most interesting piece is that this tag was created in Turkey. The people that created this and that made it a viral topic were Turkish, and it wasn't a bot. They were certified accounts of high government officials that were directing the political party that was in power. And so for some reason they took the task of globally defending Maduro for Anglo audiences. And in some of the tweets they explain that they have the same regime and that Turkey and Venezuela have the same future and that could be connected. We're not going to go over those implications, but the interesting thing is how this "We Are Maduro" hashtag which originated in Turkey. All of these accounts over there were Turkish. Then those tweets begin to be replicated by the account of Jorge Rodriguez, which is a high functioning official in the government. And then it just spreads out to the Chavism bots accounts. And then we have the campaign Trump Hands Off Venezuela, which was an error, a type error. One of the letters was robbed in regards to Trump's last name. But this hashtag in particular you would think that it starts with the President of the United States, which is in solidarity with United States and Chavism, which there's many radical sectors that support the Venezuelan government, in part because of the ignorance or sometimes because of the affiliation political. But this generated by Jorge Ariasa's office, which is a high government official, the son-in-law of Hugo Chavez, and is the person that begins to use this hashtag and is replicated by the Chavism bots, which are the green ones. The purple ones are functions in the government, officials in the government, and then the green ones are the majority of them are bots. It's automatic accounts, and the blue ones that you see in the center are businessmen, Venezuelan businessmen that are pro-Chavez and Chavistas, and they are the blue ones. They do exist. Those people do exist. And this campaign was trying to show this solidarity with the government of Maduro, and this solidarity was coming to the United States against the aggression of Trump. But all of these actors in these accounts are officials in the government and have very particular functions. And some of these accounts that we're seeing that are oppositional or extremist, which I don't think are oppositional. They're not people that we can interview or even identify, which have hundreds of thousands of users, but no one knows who they are. No en mi nombre, not in my name, is another one of those hashtags that has to do with solidarity, which originated in Spain, and it's a hashtag that starts with the Venezuelan council in Brazil. So some of the councils in Venezuela create these accounts in pro-government to show that there is an expression of no en mi nombre, which is being used in different, has been used in different cases. It was used during the Iraq War, in Spain when Spain was invading Iraq. And so this is a traditional where Spain uses this to really say no en mi nombre to show support or against. But this isn't any political action because Spain isn't really involved, but it does come out of this the Venezuelan embassy in Madrid, which is being really populated by the purple accounts right here, while we see the green ones here, which are accounts that are connected to empty sectors. And then the blue ones are Central American accounts. So you can see how different types of groups, which have different types of political affiliations, to really to defund different types of political Venezuelan political accounts, which really try to show this unity, government unity or national unity. And these images, which I'm not sure who speaks Spanish here, but any Venezuelan here who are laughing, only Venezuelans are going to laugh, because in other countries you don't understand what it is, but it's the worst offense that a Venezuelan man can say to another Venezuelan man. There's nothing uglier than that. But this hashtag right here was not generated by people that hated the government. This was another one that was generated in Turkey. And when you read the messages, they were messages in favor of Maduro. They were saying that they defended Maduro, that the overseas, they were willing to support him, but the hashtag was an insult. So that creates a conflict of like, why would you be supporting someone that you're offending? What I believe in this case is that this was one of the hashtags that was creating to distract. This isn't so much about what I'm saying. This is really about distracting the space so you don't talk about what's important. And effectively, that day became a national joke. All of the Venezuelan citizens, whether in Venezuela or out of Venezuela, we were laughing at this joke. While we laughed at this joke, it was the 24th of January of 2019. While we were laughing, 328 people were arrested for demonstrating. 26 people were killed by FICE, which is the political police. And Wikipedia was blocked in the country. These three things were very much more important and socially more important and way more important than the joke of the offense, the sexist offense against Maduro, the President Maduro. But that was the trending topic, generating this type of contamination in this space of discussion, which distracts the people from what's politically important and trivialized. In continuation with this study, I'm going to be beginning to work with the database integrity, which belongs to Twitter. I used all of this information. I obtained all this information using Node Excel, but after that study and more contacts that have allowed me to have more direct access to the Twitter accounts that they have declassified because they were automated accounts or bots involved in the generation or coordination of propaganda, which impacts electoral topics. And in those accounts, which they declassified in January of this year, there were two Venezuelans. One which was to address the political people or conversations pro Chavism. They were bots or trolls that have been not removed from function. But the second one was a data set of accounts dedicated to that have targets to that are targeting the United States. Their tweets in English and they're supporting the administration of Donald Trump. These two data sets, according to Twitter, have been connected to bots in the Venezuelan state. And so then there's that paradox. If there's this conflict between the United States and Venezuela, for what reason is the Venezuelan government, having more than 700 bots trying to create propaganda that is in favor of Donald Trump? It's strange. It's, a direct relationship, but it's contrary. It has to do with creating contaminating extremists content. So any extremism will work. Extremism in favor or against are useful. It's just to generate polarization and destroy the political atmosphere so that people cannot express themselves democratically and really express themselves in a democratic atmosphere. And that is the way that we're eroding democracy. That is how you realize that it's happening in other countries and has been very successful in Venezuela, especially in the Latin American region, which is the one that really matters to me, is the one that I know the most and the one that I have continued to study. It's happened in Nigeria and many other countries. It's not an isolated phenomenon. It is the manual to how to create a dictatorship and destroy the political conversation so that you destroy the political communications, and you really ruin the web space. And now that's the end of it. And now we can open up for questions and really have a conversation.
I take it that you haven't done this kind of work on the anti-Chavismo forces. No, I find these labels problematic. I'm not quite sure what they mean, right? But because, if you plan to do, because we have a sense of one side, but we don't know how this figures into the broader Twitter sphere in terms of how many people are reached. What are the techniques that the others are using? What is more effective? So it's kind of difficult to make sense of it in the Venezuelan political space without having that kind of, comparator. So I'm just wondering if you have, because I'm assuming that people who are against the Venezuelan government also have sophisticated understandings of how social media work and have their own strategies for how to influence, including the people who are against Chavez, Maduro, the current Venezuelan administration, who are outside of Venezuela. So I'd just like to see who is more effective ultimately.
Yes, a great question, Paxi. Actually, in that 2008 study, it was a study of trending topics related with the political situation in Venezuela. I started talking with
In that study, which was realized in 2018, I studied the hashtags that had to do with the political campaign, that had to do with political topic, and there were oppositional parties that had hashtags that were, had larger masses, or political organizations that participated in that election, large parties, smaller parties. They're also in the analysis. And in regards to the expectation that you just expressed, was the study showed is that they have no idea how to realize a campaign. There's no strategy that is super sophisticated like the one that Chavism has. They're not as efficient. They don't have the strategy against the propaganda. They don't have a strategy to address the discussions of the government. They don't have an infiltration strategy or distraction strategy. They use Twitter like radio 70 years ago to announce events. Basically, that's what they do. they announce what they're gonna do, or they repeat slogans that are used by political campaigns in the 1970s. They don't have this level of sophistication in the propaganda. I have that information, and I have a friend that's a professor of communications in Massachusetts that has insisted for me to publish a paper on just the oppositional side, and just to respond to that symmetry of the dismantling, the strategy, the sophistication, and the resources that the campaigns have to have that presence on Twitter that are pro-governmental, and the po- percula- per- how peculiar it is to use that peculiar lack that the opposition has, which when I started this study, I thought was going to be more balanced. I thought it was going to be interesting to see different strategies, but what I found was that there's a complete disleveling, that I preferred not to compare the two and just focus on the pro-governmental aspect. And philosophically, political parties can go into the confrontation, which is part of the political contention, while governments and institutions of the government and the armed forces should not be creating political propaganda, which really gave me the reason why I focus on the governmental aspect. But I do have that debt to publish this very same information, because my colleague made the same question that you just made, and maybe other people are asking the same thing. It's a very valuable question, valid question.
Yo tengo otra preguntita.
I
Y
have
más
one
que una
more
pregunta es
question, and more than anything, it's a follow up. Here, you're saying that you're focused on the nodes of communication more than on the text, but I start to think Twitter suspended some accounts from Cuba that were trolls. One thing about Cuba is that the trolls are the communication students, the communication science universities in Cuba. The access to internet is much more recent, and so it's less generalized. So anyone to have access, the students and specifically have that type of access as part of their education. So part of their education is to fill these types of accounts. I don't know if this happens in Venezuela. It's not the text of the images or the accounts, but what are the images, or what happens with that in Venezuela. In Cuba, it's pictures that they obtain from registries, pictures of registries online. They're white subjects, which is really interesting because in Cuba, it's a very mixed crowd, but they're white, beautiful, the standards. So I don't know if you've seen some of that, or if that, well, the trolls openly Chavismos, are generally using photographs of Hugo Chavez or symbols that have to do with the party. Very conventional, very rational. But trolls of these extremist opposition, they use images where the Venezuelan bandera are. Photographs that have the flag of Venezuela, dramatic, the bleeding flag or the crying flag, that type of thing. Very shocking, visually shocking. And the distraction ones are like your Cuban accounts. They use more images, of women, full bodies, some semi-nude, even if they're talking about things that have nothing to do with pornography or sexism or anything like that, but it's typically a beautiful woman or a super muscular man with a political text. It's sort of like a distraction that they're using in a sexual distraction, which has to do with marketing. Those trolls, you don't really see a picture where the image is like, oh, that must be her or that must be him. It's always like fake. You can just tell it's fake, and effectively so. And then if you do some work, you'll be able to see some of those pictures that they're pictures that have been reused. And so I wanted to ask one more question, Iria, in regards to what we spoke the other day with Stevio. When there was that question if he could be recorded during this workshop that he spoke on the Amazon, he said in a climate, authoritative climate, I cannot be recorded, which really just shows you the climate in Brazil right now. And this investigation that you're doing, up until what point does it lead you to be in risk as as an investigator? When I published the reports in 2018, I was a little bit scared for my family and friends. I was in Quito. I spoke with security and people that protected human rights about the different types of risks that would happen because of the report, but there weren't any effects. And one of the things that one of the other hats that I wear is really the one to advocate online and to protect the work done online. And what I recommend to advocates is not to hide, because the government will find you. They know that you're in opposition. They know that you're an activist. It's better for you that those that know about you could know where you are. So I prefer to be exposed. I think it helps me create networks that would protect me. And in the Venezuelan case, we've had the confirmation that that hypothesis was correct, which was the case of Luis Carlos Diaz. Luis Carlos Diaz was a journalist, a Venezuelan journalist that had a very high exposure digitally. And Luis Carlos was detained arbitrarily coming out of his job at the radio station at about 5 p.m. His wife has said at 9 o'clock, hey, he hasn't appeared. And at 11 a.m., where's Luis Carlos? At 11 p.m., where is Luis Carlos? 2 hours after his wife declares that he is missing, where is Luis Carlos? Was a trending topic. The whole world, everyone was asking where was Luis Carlos, because he had a high exposure. The next day, the commissioner Michelle Bachelet asked, where is Luis Carlos? And 2 days later, Luis Carlos was free, which is what we want. And so what I recommend to political advocates is be exposed so people know about you. Because when something happens to you, then there are people that are on your side that will stick up for you, because the government knows who you are. They know that you're an oppositional, and regardless of what you do, they will know where you are. And so create those networks that will defend you.
Very interesting talk. I forgot to say at the start that this event was live streamed.
Oh.
and to thank John and Alex from Watson for making all of this possible. Thank you. Thank you all for coming, and I just want to let you know that this Saturday we have collaborated with the Providence Film Festival, the Providence Latin American Film Festival, and we'll be showing 2 films here at the Zukowski on Friday and Saturday at 5 o'clock here. So and please go on our website, check out our schedule of talks. We don't have any talks next week, but the following week we have 2 talks on Wednesday, October 2nd and October 3rd, Thursday the 3rd. So please just check out our calendar. Thank you all for coming, and thank you again, Iria.